Ryder staggered through the jungle, his injured arm pulsing with a dull, nauseating ache. The black veins that had stopped spreading earlier now flickered faintly, glowing with an unnatural green hue when he moved too quickly. He didn't need a mirror to know his body was beginning to betray him, but the jungle itself was shifting. The once dense foliage grew sparser, replaced by strange, jagged formations that jutted from the ground like the spines of some massive creature. The air grew colder, the thick humidity of the jungle giving way to a biting chill. Ryder stumbled into a clearing, and there it was, a structure. It wasn't part of the jungle. The metallic edges of the building were sharp and deliberate, though years of exposure had rusted and corroded its exterior. Creeping vines snaked their way up the walls, but they recoiled when Ryder stepped closer, as though the structure's very presence was an affront to the living jungle. The door hung slightly ajar, its once sealed edges warped and bent. Ryder hesitated. Something deep in his gut told him this place wasn't a sanctuary, it was a tomb. But he was out of options. If the shapeshifter caught him out in the open again, he wouldn't survive. Inside, the air was sterile, unnervingly cold compared to the suffocating heat outside. Flickering overhead lights cast long, stuttering shadows along the narrow corridor. Ryder moved cautiously, his knife gripped tightly in his good hand. The walls were lined with strange markings, numbers, symbols, and diagrams that meant nothing to him. But what caught his attention were the scratches. Deep gouges marred the metal surfaces, as if something with claws had tried to tear its way out. The corridor opened into a larger room, and Ryder froze. The space was lined with tanks, each filled with a viscous, greenish liquid. Floating inside were things, half-formed, misshapen creatures that looked like failed attempts at life. Some bore disturbingly human features, a hand pressed against the inside of one tank, its fingers fused into a grotesque claw, a face twisted into an eternal scream, its flesh merging seamlessly into the alien appendages sprouting from its skull. Ryder's stomach churned, but he forced himself to keep moving. The far end of the room held a desk cluttered with yellowed papers and cracked screens. He sifted through the documents, his heart sinking as he began to piece together the truth. The facility was a research station, not a penal colony, as they'd been led to believe. It was an experiment. The scientists who had worked here had been studying the effects of Cersis IV's ecosystem on human physiology. They had discovered that the planet wasn't just alive, it was sentient, a predator on a scale that defied comprehension. The jungle didn't simply react to intruders, it adapted to them, using their biology to evolve its own defenses. Ryder found a series of personal logs from one of the lead scientists, Dr. Leona Harker. Her neat, precise handwriting became increasingly frantic with each entry. Day 67, Subject 12 shows remarkable integration with the environment. Tissue samples exhibit rapid mutation, suggesting the planet's ecosystem is accelerating their evolutionary process. This is beyond anything we imagined. Day 85. Integration is spreading faster than anticipated. Subjects are losing their humanity, both physically and cognitively. The organism doesn't just adapt, it consumes. We've made a mistake. Day 100. It's too late. The entity is learning from us. It can mimic us. It's using us. Ryder felt a cold dread seep into his bones. The shapeshifter wasn't just a creature. It was the planet's defense mechanism, a living weapon designed to consume and repurpose anything it deemed a threat. The convicts hadn't been sent here for punishment. They had been sent here as fuel for this experiment. A noise broke his concentration, a soft, wet, slithering sound from the corridor behind him. Ryder turned sharply, his pulse quickening. The sound grew louder, accompanied by a faint scraping, as though something massive was dragging itself closer. He ducked into an adjacent room, pressing himself against the wall. Through the cracked door, he saw it. The shapeshifter. It had grown. Its once humanoid form now bore the hallmarks of countless absorbed victims. Multiple limbs sprouted chaotically from its torso, some human, others grotesquely alien. Its face was a shifting mass, cycling through the features of the dead convicts Ryder had encountered. Ortiz, Marlowe, Dixon. Their expressions warped and stretched, their voices merging into a discordant chorus that echoed through the corridor. "Ryder," it rasped, its voice a wet, gurgling mockery of speech. "We are one." Ryder's breath caught in his throat. The thing knew his name. He clutched his knife tighter, his fingers trembling. He couldn't fight this. Not like this. In a desperate bid to escape, he darted out of the room and sprinted deeper into the facility. The shapeshifter roared, its many limbs clawing at the walls as it pursued him. Ryder's injured arm screamed in protest, the veins pulsing brighter with every step. He stumbled into another room, slamming the door behind him and jamming a metal bar through the handles. The room was a control center, filled with screens and consoles that buzzed faintly with residual power. Ryder activated the nearest console, praying it still worked. The screens flickered to life, displaying grainy footage of the jungle above. He saw convicts running, screaming, being pulled into the trees. And then he saw himself, crouched in the cave days earlier, the shapeshifter stalking him from the shadows. The realization hit him like a blow to the chest. They had been watching him this entire time. He wasn't just a prisoner, he was a subject, his every move recorded and analyzed. But something had gone wrong. The scientists had lost control, and now the planet itself was finishing their work. The door behind him buckled as the shapeshifter slammed into it, its inhuman strength bending the metal. Ryder frantically searched the console for anything useful. A file labeled "Failsafe Protocol" blinked on the screen. Without hesitation, he activated it. An automated voice echoed through the facility. "Failsafe initiated. Reactor overload in 5 minutes." Ryder didn't wait to see what would happen. He bolted from the room, navigating the twisting corridors as alarms blared around him. The shapeshifter howled in rage, its pursuit relentless. But Ryder had one advantage. It couldn't predict desperation. He found a hatch leading to the surface and clawed his way out, the facility rumbling beneath him as the reactor began its countdown. Behind him, the ground split open, the shapeshifter clawing its way into the light. Ryder didn't stop running. He didn't look back. The explosion came moments later, a deafening roar that shook the jungle. Flames shot into the sky, consuming the facility and the monster with it. Ryder collapsed in the dirt, gasping for air. But as he looked at the black veins crawling up his arm, he realized the fight was far from over. The air was heavy with smoke and ash, and the ground beneath Ryder trembled as the remnants of the facility burned in the distance. The explosion had torn through the jungle, leaving a gaping scar of fire and twisted metal in its wake. For a moment, Ryder allowed himself to believe it was over. Then his arm throbbed. The veins, now glowing an ominous green, pulsed visibly beneath his skin, writhing like living things. Ryder gritted his teeth and tightened a strip of cloth around the infected limb, but it was a futile gesture. Whatever the shapeshifter had done to him was spreading, taking root in his body like a parasitic vine. But he didn't have time to dwell on it. The jungle around him was alive with movement, its once hostile flora now twisting and churning, as though in mourning for the destroyed facility. Vines lashed out at him like angry snakes. Trees groaned as their bark split to reveal fleshy, pulsating tissue underneath. The planet wasn't done with him. Ryder forced himself to move, staggering through the chaos with one thought driving him forward. Escape. He didn't know if it was possible. He didn't know if the alien infection in his blood would even let him leave. But he had to try. The pod was exactly where he had seen it in the facility's surveillance logs, a derelict escape craft half buried in a clearing of the jungle. Its hull was covered in rust and moss, the cockpit glass cracked but intact. Ryder approached cautiously, his every instinct screaming at him to stay alert. The jungle had a way of luring its prey into traps, and he wouldn't survive another encounter with the shapeshifter, or whatever it had become now. The pod's hatch groaned as he wrenched it open, revealing a cramped interior that smelled of decay and burnt electronics. Ryder climbed inside, his knife still clutched in his good hand, and scanned the controls. The console was a mess of blinking lights and frayed wires, but it responded when he pressed a button. The pod hummed faintly, a sound so weak it was almost pitiable. "Come on," Ryder muttered, frantically pressing buttons. A screen flickered to life, displaying a garbled message. "Emergency protocol enabled. Launch viable. Warning, structural integrity compromised." It was his only chance. Ryder slammed his fist against the controls, initiating the launch sequence. The pod shuddered violently, and he braced himself as the hatch began to seal. The jungle outside seemed to sense his impending escape. Vines shot toward the pod like grasping hands, slamming against the hull and wrapping tightly around it. The entire pod rocked as the planet itself tried to hold him back. "No!" Ryder roared, slashing at the vines through a gap in the hatch. His knife bit into the writhing plant matter, greenish-black ichor spraying as the vines recoiled. But more took their place, thicker and stronger than before. The pod's engines sputtered to life, emitting a high-pitched whine as they fought against the jungle's grip. Inside the pod, alarms blared. Ryder's infected arms spasmed violently, the black veins spreading further up his neck and chest. His vision blurred, the edges of the world warping as his body began to rebel against him. He screamed, not in fear, but in defiance, and slammed his fist against the console one last time. The engines roared, a sudden burst of power tearing the pod free from the jungle's grasp. The vines snapped like brittle cords as the craft shot into the sky, leaving the cursed planet behind. Ryder collapsed into the pilot's seat, his chest heaving with exhaustion. The pod trembled and groaned as it climbed higher and higher, the atmosphere thick with turbulence. But the planet was growing smaller beneath him, its pulsating surface retreating into the distance. For the first time in days, Ryder allowed himself to hope. But the feeling was fleeting. His arm had gone numb, the infection spreading so far that he could barely recognize the limb as his own. The veins pulsed in time with his heartbeat, and his skin had taken on a translucent quality, faintly glowing with the same alien light as the jungle. He stared at his reflection in the cracked cockpit glass. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken and rimmed with dark circles. But worse than that were the changes. His pupils were no longer round, but slit like a predator's. His teeth felt sharper, his tongue heavier in his mouth. He knew what was happening. He wasn't leaving the jungle behind, it was coming with him. The pod's control panel crackled, and a faint voice cut through the static. Ryder's blood ran cold as he recognized it. "Ryder!" the voice rasped, wet and gurgling. "You can't leave." The shapeshifter's voice. No, the planet's voice. It had found a way inside. Ryder slammed his fist against the console, trying to cut off the transmission, but the voice continued, low and insidious. "You are part of us now. You carry us." The truth hit him with the weight of a collapsing star. He hadn't escaped. He had become the planet's emissary, a carrier of its infection, its will. Whatever he had been before was gone, consumed by the same alien intelligence that had devoured everyone else. Ryder leaned back in the chair, his breathing shallow. Outside the viewport, the stars stretched endlessly before him, a glittering expanse of freedom that now felt like a cruel joke. His body spasmed again, and he looked down to see his hand shifting, the skin splitting and reforming into something alien. He clenched it into a fist, holding on to the last shred of himself. With trembling fingers, Ryder activated the pod's distress beacon. He recorded his final message, his voice steady despite the horror coursing through him. To anyone who finds this message, don't come to Cersis IV. Don't send anyone else. The planet, it's alive. It doesn't just consume you, it makes you part of it. I tried to escape, but it's inside me now. It's spreading. If this reaches you, destroy this ship. Destroy me. He paused, his voice faltering for the first time. Please. The recording ended, and Ryder slumped in his seat. The pod drifted into the cold void of space, its engines failing one by one. In the reflection of the viewport, Ryder no longer saw himself. His face had shifted, his features unrecognizable. And then, in the stillness of space, he smiled. The transmission flickered, then cut to static. Somewhere in the darkness, something stirred.